The way that weapons scale for damage in NightReign is completely different to the base Elden Ring game. In fact, there's so many surprising factors where previous weapons that were based around intelligence and faith are actually much more powerful in the hands of nightfarers that are based around strength and dexterity. So let's take a deep dive and see what nightfarers are actually best for each weapon type. Now, I'm going to obviously try and keep this video as short and as simple for you guys, and as I mentioned in the intro there, the way that weapons scale in NightReign is completely different to the base game of Elden Ring. As soon as you load into your game, you can go and see that for yourself, because if you either go to the codex or the weapon chest in the training grounds, you can sift through all of the weapons and see the stats that each weapon scale with. I would also like to point out that there is no split scalings, or at least no like convoluted split scalings that you need to think of. So for example, in base Elden Ring, the Death's Poker, which I believe normally gets like a D rated in intelligence when you fully upgrade it, is actually best scaled with intelligence for its Ash of War, because that is purely a magic based attack. So although the weapon scales better with dex and also strength, if you pump your intelligence in base Elden Ring, you're going to be doing monstrous damage like you're seeing on screen. But in NightReign, you do not have the same effect, where intelligence is the best stat for the Ash of War, so people like Recluse actually do less damage with that magic based attack than say someone like Raider or Wilder. So essentially in NightReign, they've just simplified everything, because we no longer need to think about additional scalings, like does this attack do say fire damage or does it do magic damage. They have basically merged the damage types into one, which is why when you do obtain a weapon in this game, it just sort of gives you a flat damage rating. It doesn't give you say 100 physical and 100 magic. It just gives you, oh, this does 250 damage. There you go, use it. And the primary stat for whatever weapon that may be is going to be the thing that gives you the most damage for that weapon, no matter what attack you're doing. There's no distinction between say an Ash of War that does holy damage and therefore should only scale with faith, and a physical attack that should only scale with dex and strength. The primary scaling stat on the weapon affects all attacks. So again, as another prime example of this, something like the Wing of Astel, which you might assume will be best in say Duchess's hands, as she has very good dex and also very good intelligence, you actually do less damage with Duchess compared to Executor using the Wing of Astel, because he's got an S rated scaling in dexterity and Duchess only has a B. Executor just buffs the overall damage output more because he's scaling the best scaling stat on that weapon more, as he's got an S-rated scaling in dexterity. Again, as another example, the Blasphemous Blade, which again you would think would be best with a faith scaling character like say Revenant or again Recluse, using its Ash of War, which is purely fire damage, again gets outclassed by the strength users, because the primary stat on the Blasphemous Blade is strength, and where Raider has an S-rated strength and Wilder has an A-rated strength, they just do more damage because they're affecting the best scaling stat on the weapon more. So as I mentioned earlier, NightReign has just simplified everything. If a weapon is high in strength scaling, then you need to be using a strength based character. If it's high in dex, you need to be using the best dex characters. If it only scales with faith or intelligence, then obviously you need to be using the faith or intelligence characters. But just because I'm obviously pointing out that each weapon scales best with a particular stat, it doesn't mean that they're not usable on other characters. So for example, Duchess, because she's still got an A-rated scaling in intelligence, she actually gets a lot of damage out of spells, and her high dexterity also helps with the casting time a little bit, especially in the earlier levels. So you can tailor characters to say be a DPS type character using daggers and maybe proccing a lot of stuff like poison, bleed and whatever with Duchess, but then you can also have like a spell like Shattering Crystal, which does tremendous amounts of damage and also a good amount of stance damage, giving you obviously all kinds of versatility, as you can just do a very powerful attack whilst also doing a lot of damage over time and a lot of DPS with things like daggers and katanas. That can also be applied to all of the different characters, because obviously people like Wilder, who are incredibly versatile, can basically use any weapon to some degree. Iron Eye can obviously have his bow and then like something like the Rivers of Blood in his back pocket to do again a tremendous amount of damage. He's got high dex and high arcane, and like the example I showed you earlier, if you're using Executor and you're using his base katana to do a lot of damage, you can then also pair that with something like the Wing of Astel to do an insane amount of stance damage with the Ash of War and the charged heavies, obliterating pretty much everybody. So again, pretty much every character has the ability to obtain all the different damage types. There's going to be a greatsword with fire damage on it, obviously things like the Blasphemous Blade, of course. There's even going to be ones with holy damage on it, like Ordovus' greatsword, magic with the Death Poker like I mentioned earlier, and the same goes for daggers like Glintstone Chris, the Black Knife, Rejuvia. So like I say, pretty much every character will be versatile, or at least will have access to ridiculously powerful weapons. You just need to know which ones are best for which character, and that's what I'm hopefully going to show you right now, because I'm just going to throw up a few graphics on screen. I'm just going to show you obviously every single character and talk about it whilst they're on the screen. So with Wilder, he is particularly tailored for greatswords. He's also got his own unique moveset with greatswords, which is obviously quite nice, but his high dex and high strength actually means he gets the best out of straight swords as well, curved greatswords, and then essentially any other great or colossal weapons like great hammers or colossal weapons, colossal swords, even things like Moquin's Sacred Spear is actually best in the hands of Wilder because of the strength, dexterity, and arcane that you get on that. And then there's a very similar story for Raider 2, maybe not using so much of the dexterity weapons and more so focusing on the colossal weapons, because again, he's got an S-rated scaling in strength, and the colossal weapons also have an S-rated scaling in strength. So the best weapons or the best damage you're going to be doing is with colossal weapons and great axes, great hammers, and obviously great swords as well. So the best strength weapons are obviously tailored for Raider. Guardian again is actually more scaled towards strength, so similar weapons apply, but he's also got C's across the board for dexterity, arcane, and faith. But again, where he's shield bro and is protecting the flock, you kind of want to be using the shield poking if you can, or at least give yourself some range with, say, something like Siluria's Tree, where you can use the Ash of War afterwards. The Dragon Halberd, for instance, as well, is really good with him. So again, a kind of like mix of a strength, dexterity type weapons with a little bit of faith mixed in there as well, but ideally some spears so you can do the shield poking meta against the final bosses. Again, Iron Eye, you're going to be wanting to use the bows, as he's got the unique moveset with the bows, but as I mentioned earlier, with his high dexterity and high arcane, because he's got an A in dex and a B in arcane, you can also use things like Rejuvias, daggers, curved swords as well. You'll get a lot of damage out of the Wing of Astel with Iron Eye 2, but obviously things like the Rivers of Blood, Eleanor's Pole Blade, basically anything that can provide a status effect as well will also be really, really good with Iron Eye. So again, katanas, daggers, claws, fist weapons, those types of things. But he also actually gets some of the best damage output with things like whips too, like the Giant's Red Braid. I'm sure you've seen a lot of gameplay of that being used against people like the Sentient Pest. If you're using Iron Eye with that particular weapon, you're going to be doing monstrous damage. I'll try and hopefully put a clip on screen for you now. With Ocelot using it in one of our games, it was kind of mental. And then Duchess, as we mentioned, has the B in dexterity and also faith and an A in intelligence. So again, using spells is quite viable with Duchess. Using things like Carrion Slice, you're going to do a lot of damage. Again, she's also got a unique moveset with daggers, so if you want to do that, you can do. But she's also going to get some of the best damage out of the curved swords too, and can also deal some really good damage with the Sword of Night and Flame, as well as things like Mikkelin's Night Sword, as well as that is dexterity, faith, and strength. But primarily, you want to be going with daggers, spells, and possibly katanas as well with Duchess. Then Recluse and Revenant are again very similar, where you want to be going with the incantations and the spells. Obviously, again, an S-rated faith for both of them will allow him to get the best out of things like Cypher Patter and the Coded Sword, of course. But where Revenant has a slightly better arcane stat, again, you're going to be good at proccing things like Poison, Scarlet Rot, Frost, and also Bleed, so you can get the best out of those kind of weapons like Venomous Fang, Rivers of Blood, Eleanor's Pole Blade, etc, etc, Rejuvia, of course. But ideally, with Recluse, you do want to keep her strictly sort of spell or incantation based. She does not have the best stats for anything else, as she's got C's in arcane and dexterity and then a D in strength, so she really is a spellcaster. But again, if you haven't used Shattering Crystal, Rancor Call, Carrion Slicer, there's a whole list of spells that are really, really good. So I ideally keep her as a mage and use sorceries, but again, feel free to use any incantations you pick up for your game with Recluse as well. And then of course, Executor, as we've mentioned in this is strictly arcane and dexterity based, as he's only got a C in strength, D in faith, and D in intelligence. So again, katanas, daggers, curved swords, anything that has an arcane or a dexterity stat will be best with Executor. And actually his starting weapon, if you can apply blood loss or even like frost to your beginning weapon, that can very easily carry you from the very beginning to the very end, depending on what boss you're coming up against. So feel free to do that as well. But again, as much as this video is being a guideline for you guys, showing you what is kind of like the best weapons to be using, feel free to go and do your own experiments. Go try and test some other things. Feel free to come back to this video and let me know if you're like, hey Jazza, by the way, I found out that if you actually use Recluse and get this weapon, it's insane. You never know, there could be something out there that I've missed. But hopefully this video has cleared this up, because again, I do get a lot of comments or like people wondering why a certain weapon isn't doing so well with a certain character, and it's typically because they've still got the old Elden Ring brain on, using things like Death's Poker with Recluse, being like, hang on a second, this is supposed to be magic damage, why am I not doing anything? It's because it's actually tailored for strength as opposed to magic. And as I say, hopefully this video has shown that to you, made it a bit more clear, and if it has done or it's helped you out in any way, if you don't mind me asking you just to leave a like rating down below, that would be obviously very appreciated. And if you want to stick around for more sort of tidbits around NightReign, I can't promise I'll be making too many more videos. I will obviously cover the new bosses when they come out in a week's time, but if there is any other news, we'll obviously update you, so feel free to stick around for that. And we are still playing base Elden Ring as well, doing a whole bunch of live streams, and hopefully going back to more videos on that soon too. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, again, feel free to subscribe. It is free to do. You can click the button down below right now and that will be done. But other than that, that's everything from me. So again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I guess I'll catch you in the next one with whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.